A Kansas City Chiefs star is under fire for his commencement address, a pro-life activist is heading to prison for 57 months, and a mass baptism saw 1,614 people get immersed on a Florida beach. We'll be talking about that and more in just a moment. I'm going to be joined by Goins Phillips from FaithWire and CBN News, and Valerie Richardson from the Washington Times. Lots to dig into today. So Trey and Val, there is so much going on in the world as always, and we're going to hit a couple of the big stories, but this one story about Kansas City Chiefs player Harrison Butker and his commencement speech, this one is wild because it goes into 50 different directions, a lot of different views on it. Before we get into some of the finer details, Val, can you give us sort of a 30,000-foot view of what is actually going on here? How did this all start?
Yes, good to talk with you, Billy. What happened with Harrison Butker is this. He gave a graduation speech at Benedictine College, which is a small Catholic college in Kansas, and he didn't hold back. He took on the culture wars, full on. He took shots at the pro-choice side. He took shots at Joe Biden for his position on abortion. He had a little jab there at Pride Month, and he came out and he sort of gave a shout out to women who want to work in the home versus having a full-time career. And all of these positions have put him in the news, and it sort of made him the cultural flashpoint of the moment. You've got people on both sides, either condemning what he said or cheering what he said, and he's the kicker. He's a Pro Bowl kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs, and yet he's really sort of captured the zeitgeist right now.
Yeah, I mean, Trey, you've looked at this a lot too, and I guess I'll ask you to editorialize a little bit here, just because I'm interested from your perspective. Was there anything in this speech that warranted this level of frustration and anger from people?
Well, I mean, this degree of frustration, I think, no. I mean, so the thing that's most frustrating to me, or the thing that's even the silliest about this whole thing, is Butker was there speaking to he was preaching to the choir, so to speak, right? He was talking to a Catholic university, a group of Catholic students who largely, if not everyone there in the venue, shared his perspective. So what he was saying was not radical within this group. It's like people who on social media are just screaming at a group of people for, you shouldn't be speaking that to people who agree with you, and then all of you shouldn't be agreeing with him. That to me is just kind of silly, the way that this whole debate has been framed. What he was saying was not inflammatory, it wasn't radical, it was just standard Christian conservative ideology. And there was nothing like fringe about what he was saying. I think the only criticism you could say is if he was only applying this to women, about the family being your primary should be your primary focus. But I have not listened to his full speech, but from what I've read and from what I've heard, he made similar comments about husbands. That your ultimate allegiance should be to your children, your family, your spouse. So at the end of the day, what he was saying to me was not that radical, and it certainly doesn't rise to the occasion of getting him kicked off a team for speaking to like-minded people about a like-minded perspective
Yeah,
that is, again, not that radical.
well, Val, I kept listening to it. I went back to it 3 or 4 times, and the parts, especially about women, when he spoke directly to the women, and it was interesting because every time I listened to it, when you read the lens of how it's being presented, it sounded like he said all women, every woman. The more I listened to it, it sounded like most women, or a lot of you are going to appreciate this more, even if you have a career. I don't know. I'd love to get your perspective as well on the reaction, Val, of what you thought, because I don't know. To me, the reaction just feels so, even if you disagree or have issues on the gender or the other issues, so over the top.
Yeah, I think, frankly, part of that may be the Taylor Swift angle, because apparently some people are interpreting his speech as, Taylor Swift, isn't living up to her potential because she's not married with children. And so I guess the Swifties on TikTok and Instagram have all been activated because, as everybody knows, Taylor Swift dates his teammate, Travis Kelce. So the Taylor Swift angle may be one of the things that's juicing this, but Trey is right. Right after he spoke to the women about don't underestimate the value of having a fulfilling home life. He said the same thing to men. He said, we need men in the home. And they need to focus on their roles there and not be absentee fathers and husbands. And so he was speaking to both groups, but yeah, I think maybe the Taylor Swift angle may be part of it, but and Trey also makes another good point. He was really preaching to the choir, but he is a three-time Super Bowl winner with the Kansas City Chiefs, and he is known in the sports world as being an outspoken conservative Catholic, and so I think all of this sort of provided the fuel for the current bonfire we're seeing.
Yeah, and when you look at this issue, there's a couple of things. A, the Swifties are very easy to get going. So there's that. You don't have to say much to get them going. But the second thing is, I mean, it's rare that somebody hits on so many different fiery issues in one 20-minute speech. So I think you have this factor of he's talking about Biden without really naming him. I don't think he named him. He said commander in chief, basically. I mean, he's talking about the president, our leader. He's talking about abortion. He's talking about all of these issues, the gender issue. And so you have this flammable situation. But again, I will say, I find it odd when people who are arguing for equity and inclusion use exclusion as an argument, right? They're like, oh, we need to exclude him, but we all need to be. So to me, it's just like, feel free to disagree. Do you think, Val, this goes anywhere? I mean, this 100 and almost 200,000 people who have signed this petition.
Well, I saw that Catholic Vote is countering with their own petition, and they are now the conservative Catholic side has gotten energized, and they're coming out in his defense. The other thing that I should note is that Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey has launched an investigation into the Kansas City mayor's office because on their official X account they doxed him. They doxed Harrison Butker by saying, just by the way, Harrison Butker lives in this town. In other words, it seemed to be a way. It seemed to be wanting to encourage people to go hassle him in person, and they took whoever put that up on the official Kansas City account took it down a few hours later, but the attorney general has launched an investigation into this, and the mayor has apologized for it. So you have this whole sort of religious freedom angle that's now coming into it, and political angle. So that may not die down right away. That they're going to look into this and see exactly what happened and why basically Kansas City was doxing Harrison Butker. So for that reason, I think the story may have a few legs.
Yeah, no, I think we'll probably be back talking about it in a few weeks. Who knows? So we'll keep looking at that one. And I want to move on to your story, Trey, because this story is very interesting on so many levels. Again, it's an important story. It's about this pro-life advocate, Lauren Handy. She's been sentenced to 57 months in prison. What in the world is she being sentenced for? What happened here?
Well, I would also classify this story as like topsy-turvy crazy to me. But so she's a pro-life activist. In October of 2020, she was one of the organizers behind a pro-life demonstration outside of this Washington Surgery Clinic, which is an abortion clinic in Washington, D.C. So, according to a CBN News story over on our website, cbnnews.com, this group of people, again organized by Lauren Handy, prayed together out loud. They locked arms in front of the facility's staff entrance, and then at the end, ultimately attached themselves to rope and chains to block the doors of the building as a means, they said at the time, to quote, delay the murder of kids. So later they were charged with FACE Act violations. And for those who don't know, the FACE Act stands for the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. And on, I guess it was Tuesday of this week, she was formally sentenced, Lauren Handy, to, as you said, 57 months or roughly 5 years in prison. Plus, following that, 3 years of supervision for her effort there in this protest, right? So that is just, the whole situation to me is crazy, and the irony there, of course, is the abortionist who many people, conservatives, Christians, certainly pro-lifers would take issue with, is this man who is. For those who believe that life begins at conception, is playing a major role there, playing the role in ending the lives of unborn innocent children. He's continuing to do his work, no consequence whatsoever, while a woman who is staging a peaceful protest of people who prayed she's being put in prison for roughly 5 years. Though she did say in a statement, and I'll open it up, but I want to give her statement. She said she's, quote, at peace with herself and her future. She said, it's been close to 9 months since I was abruptly ripped from my community. She's talking about when she was initially charged. She said, this has led me to think long and hard about what to say about my sentencing today in federal court. Some drafts were angry and righteous, while most were just a tear stained longing for my loved ones back home. Yes, this time has been challenging, but I refuse to be jaded because life goes on even in jail. So I might as well continue to love and cry and scream and dance. That is joy.
Okay, Val, I'll let you weigh in here. I just so one of the things about the freedom of access to clinic entrances, the FACE Act, that I don't
Yeah.
know enough about, and I think maybe you guys would know more than I would. I've done some stories on it, but they're more sort of anecdotal. Is this a newer use? It feels like in the last couple of years since the overturning of Roe, we're seeing this be used again and again. And let me I'm not defending blocking clinic entrances. I think it is problematic to block entrances regardless of what we think about different issues. But when you start to weigh what's actually happening at some of these clinics versus blocking an entrance and seeing somebody go to prison for 57 months, I don't know. Anyway, Val, do you know anything about this? Like the use of it? Is this a newer use of the FACE Act?
Well, what you have seen under the Biden administration is they are taking cases of potential FACE Act violations. In some cases you have cases that the local authorities have dismissed, and they are bringing new federal charges against pro-life demonstrators, and they've been doing it from the beginning of the Biden administration, but obviously it's gotten a lot more attention since the overthrow of Roe. And you have this summer in July, I want to say another 10 pro-life activists who are going to be sentenced under for FACE Act conviction or violations. They've already been found guilty. Um, I want to say like a half a dozen of them or so could face like 11 years in prison. And you have this all against the backdrop of the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests, where people were literally
Yeah.
burning down buildings, burning down a police station, blocking and throwing rocks and disrupting federal courthouses. And I don't think any of these people got the kind of the time that we're seeing the pro-lifers getting for their FACE Act violations, which is why you have bills from the Republicans in both the House and Senate to overturn the FACE Act, because it seems basically to be criminalizing some forms of protest and allowing other forms of protest, to to be sanctioned. The FACE Act also applies to blocking of pro-life pregnancy center entrances, but as far as I know, they have never actually gotten a conviction on that. Very few cases in that sense have been brought, and I don't think we've ever seen anybody actually convicted of that. But you are seeing that on the other side, and the perception, or the there is a growing perception that basically this is another example of the Justice Department weaponizing it's weaponizing its power to go after its political opponents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to add anything there, Trey.
Well, the only thing that I was going to add is I don't actually know a whole lot more than Val does about the history of the FACE Act and how it's been used or applied in different groups. But it is interesting to hear those comments, Val, because I think that kind of gives us a little bit of context. But I do want to say that Republicans in Congress, both in the House and the Senate, have noted that in their view, this is a weaponization by President Biden's Department of Justice against pro-lifers. So they've introduced legislation against the FACE Act to remove the FACE Act as something that can be used in situations like this. So Representative Chip Roy, a Republican in the House of Representatives, he said today's outrageous 57th sentence for a progressive pro-life activist is a stark reminder Biden's DOJ is fully weaponized against pro-life American citizens, and they're using the FACE Act to do it. He went on to say House Republicans should defund the DOJ weaponization, repeal the FACE Act, and stand up for the freedoms that we campaign on. And then Senator Mike Lee co-sponsored that bill to repeal the FACE Act. So it's interesting to see the situation that we're in, because I think you could make the argument that the FACE Act is being certainly used in one direction much more than it's being used in another. And it does beg the question, why? Is there an agenda there? And I think it'd be pretty easy to make the case that there is, in fact, an agenda there.
Well, and again, I mean, these are crimes in my view, and I am not an attorney general or even a police officer, but that you find somebody for, or you get, I mean,
Right.
you
Right.
know,
A 5-year prison sentence is absurd.
I'm
Right.
right, and I think that is, and also, I mean, how long did it take to get the government to take seriously the pro-life, clinics that were being attacked endlessly and that have been since the overturning of Roe? I think you have that overturning of Roe and the Dobbs decision is really the backdrop of the anger and fury that I think is probably driving some of this, right? And so that you can't. I don't know. To me, I'll editorialize. I don't care. It's crazy to put somebody in jail for 57 months for this. I just like fine her $1,000 and move on. I don't know. Not even again, not
Well,
even endorsing that, but
yeah, and the fact that, as Val was saying, when it comes to the Black Lives Matter, the riots that happened during the Black Lives Matter uprising, I guess you could say, of 2020, and the fact that for months we had conversations about, well, some of this violence was justified. We can explain away some of the destruction that was caused here, some of the looting and the fires. Like there was so much effort to bend over backwards to give the benefit of the doubt to justify situations, whereas with Lauren Handy and the people who are protesting with her, it was immediately what she did was wrong and she has to be sentenced by the letter of the law. I think that double standard is gross.
yeah, I love that. It is gross. I was not expecting that. That's great. Well, listen, I want to end on a positive note with our last story here because there's a lot of stuff going on. But this, and we've covered these again and again, but these mass baptisms, I find them incredibly fascinating. And this is the story I wanted to bring to the table today. But this was out on a Florida beach recently 1,614 people. This was put on by the Church of 1122. The pastor's Joby Martin. And they do this big baptism every year. Last year, they had 1,100 people. This year, again, over 1,600. And I had a chance to talk with that pastor, and it was interesting. Every baptism I've been to, obviously there are different denominations do it differently. Some do babies, others do, in my church, we do adult baptisms or older kids when they make that decision. But, I'm used to like one person doing the baptisms because it's a couple people. This was so big, they needed 50 to 60 people to actually help do the baptisms in the ocean. And it was just incredible hearing these stories of people's lives changing, regardless of where people are spiritually, whether they believe or they don't. Hearing these stories of people, I mean, 1,600 people. And by the way, 10,000 people from the church on the beach watching this. So, this massive group of 10,000, these 1,600 people. And I'll just share one of the stories that he told me that really got me. It was about this guy and the way he described him. It was funny. He was like, this guy looked like he had a pretty serious backstory. He had tattoos that were not well done. You just looked at him and you were like, this guy's got a backstory. And so he's bringing this guy into the water to baptize him. And he asks him, who do you believe Jesus Christ is? And he said, at that moment, when he's about to dunk him under, this guy's 10-year-old daughter is walking out into the water and she's just bawling her eyes out, watching her dad. And the pastor talked about they do the baptism. They're all hugging and crying. And he just said, it's amazing to see these examples of people changing their lives, of making these commitments to faith. And, you think about the backdrop of everything we just talked about and the backdrop of the crazy culture we're in. When we hear stories like this, to me, it's just encouraging to know that, yes, there's a dumpster fire, but at the same time, there's a lot of people waking up and having life change. And so, I don't know, Val, I'll throw it to you on that one, just as we sort of close out.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. I mean, that's a lot of people. That's amazing, and I think, yeah, you kind of wonder what's going on and what's happening in the culture that's causing people to want to partake in these very public baptism events, and it's definitely something we need to be watching.
Agreed. Agreed. Any final words, Trey, from you? I know you love these stories.
Well, yeah, I think it's such an encouragement. I think it's a good reminder that while the world is doing what the world does, there's so much darkness in the world. It's a good reminder that a diamond shines brightest against a dark backdrop, and I think that's what we're seeing now is the gospel shines the brightest when the world is at its darkest. So it's a beautiful reminder that the Lord is active and working, and the Holy Spirit can do anything to reform and redeem a situation.
I love that. Well, that is a great place to close. Val and Trey, thanks as always for breaking it all down for us.
Thanks, Billy.
That's all for today's Higher Ground. We'll see you next week for another episode of the show. Be sure to head over to the Washington Times and Higher Ground for more news and headlines throughout the week.